Hi, I'm Nathan from Serious Geeks, and in this video I'm going to continue the Tactica series after a little bit of a break for New Year with the Predator Desctructor and Predator Annihilator for Codex Space Marines. Since they're both very similar vehicles and arguably they should probably be on the same datasheet, I'm going to do these both together and talk about their various tactical merits within the video on a separate basis where needed. So, looking at the Predator, both variants have the exact same stat line. As always, great place to start. Movement 12, which is standard for Space Marine old school vehicles. As always, weapon skill 6+, which means they're not going to be doing a lot of damage in close combat. Ballistic skill 3+, which does degrade, 4+ and 5+ respectively. Strength 6, which is relevant only to certain weapons and abilities and in case you get a lucky hit in close combat, so not really that relevant. Toughness 7, standard for most vehicles, quite good. Wounds 11, which is fairly standard for a vehicle. Remember, even a Lehman Russ only has 12 wounds, and with a 3+ armor save, you know that it's fairly well protected. And then the last two stats, standard leadership of 8 for a Space Marine vehicle, and 3 attacks, that again does degrade. So, referring to the degrading stat lines, the attacks is pretty much irrelevant. They're not going to be doing much damage with them anyway. You never know, you might get a lucky hit in. But crucially, the movement and the ballistic skill are the things to worry about. Movement will degrade from 12 down to 6, which is quite a big drop in speed, and 3 after that, but by then the vehicle's probably almost dead. And the degradation of the ballistic skill can be quite terminal because hitting on a 4+ with Space Marine weapons that you're paying premiums for is quite hard when you don't have lots of cheap infantry like the Astra Militarum. The faction keywords is Imperium, Adeptus Astartes and Chapter, so whatever your chosen chapter they will have that keyword. And the standard keywords are Vehicle, Predator, Smokescreen, and depending on what type of Predator it is, it will either say Predator Desctructor or Predator Annihilator. Of these, the most relevant is the Vehicle and Smokescreen rules because there are no additional stratagems or special rules that affect Predators or Predator Desctructor or Annihilators at present, but that could change depending on supplements in the future. Now, the standard armament is the main change and difference between the Predator Desctructor and the Predator Annihilator. The Desctructor has the Predator autocannon, which is a range 48, heavy 2d3, strength 7, -1 AP, which is very average, but crucially, a damage 3 weapon. I absolutely adore this weapon. I think it's brilliant. In 8th edition it was very powerful, and in 9th edition it is just as powerful, if not more so, simply because units with 3 wounds on their profile are a lot more pronounced. Look at the 2 main Codex books that have come out, Necrons and Space Marines, and there are plenty of toughness 5, 3 wound models in both armies, and this means that this weapon can hit them and potentially kill each one with 1 shot. Gravis armor for Space Marines, all of which have 3 wounds on their profile. Terminators, again, they have 3 wounds on their profile. They will absolutely hate this weapon. You'll hit them with multiple times, and okay, it's only -1 AP, which can be different in the Devastator Doctrine, which is only going to be for 1 turn, but still, -1 AP means that they'll either be on a 4+ save in the case of Gravis armor, or on a 3+ save in the case of Terminators. It's quite easy if they have 3 or 4 saves to make to lose a couple of models, which is quite critical for those sort of high wound value, high toughness models and units that are quite difficult to put down otherwise. So predominantly, the Predator Desctructor has a Predator autocannon, which is pretty useful for taking out heavy infantry or very heavy infantry. So that's its main role. Give it heavy bolters and it can really chew through Space Marines. Each one of its weapon system can put down a Space Marine with every failed save. And it's going to be quite useful hitting multiple wound models in general with it. Monsters will not like this weapon system, and they will not like heavy bolters with them. In this way, the Predator Desctructor leaps out at you as a little bit of a heavy infantry specialist. Remember, being a vehicle means that it can move and fire without any penalty to hit. So it can move around cover and hunt any target it wants and put a lot of damage on it. Light vehicles, again, are also very susceptible to this weapon system because they have a very mediocre toughness and not too many wounds, which means concentrated fire from a Predator Desctructor will often see them destroyed. The other option when using a Predator Destructor is to add in the las cannons for the sponsons. Okay, you only get 2 las cannons added into the mix, but it actually gives quite a serviceable anti-tank capacity, and it isn't too bad. It's actually able to put quite a lot of damage on opposing vehicles because you've got torrent of fire there. You've got an average of 4 shots that are firing out that do 3 damage apiece, plus you've got the 2 las cannon shots that potentially can do up to 12 damage. They do d6 damage for each wounding hit. This is the most expensive option. It's also the most expensive option for both variants of tank actually, because the Predator Destructor has seen a points increase above the Predator Annihilator simply because of the utility and power of the Predator autocannon. Due to this points increase, I would recommend the Predator Destructor goes with a slightly cheaper version of the heavy bolters in their sponsons to really support the vehicle. Because you don't want to just have the single weapon system, you're already paying quite a lot of points. It's okay to add an extra 30 on to get a lot more hit and power, and that's what I would recommend with that. Don't despair too much if your Predator Destructor is modelled to have las cannon sponsons. It's still very effective. In fact, as an anti-tank platform, it is incredibly potent, and it also has the utility to be able to split fire as well and go for heavy infantry whilst the las cannons plug away at your vehicles. So it's very useful, very powerful on the tabletop. It's slightly more expensive, but it's still going to have a bit of utility. The Predator Destructor is the utility vehicle. It's able to do quite a lot. And even if you end up firing at just an orc mob, you've got 6 shots for the heavy bolters if you've got that loadout. And then you've got the Predator autocannon, which is another 4 shots. So you've got 10 shots firing at infantry. Still a very effective weapon system. In contrast, coming in at slightly cheaper, minus 10 points on the Predator Destructor, is the Predator Annihilator. Twin-link las cannons are very potent. Of course, Melter is the new hotness, excuse the pun, but the problem with Melter is that many of the platforms that use Melter are relatively weak, or they're going to get wiped out shortly after just because of the position they're in. They have to be often very close, or they're on a very expensive platform, such as the Gladiator Valiant, which has a lot of Melter power, but it's incredibly expensive to be able to field. Twin-link las cannons are brilliant because they give you ranged punch. 48 inches is a healthy reach out and touch range, and it also means that on the platform such as a Predator, you're not wasting too many points on a vehicle that's just going to get wiped out very easily because it's not going to be straight on the front line. It's not necessarily anyway, depending on where you place it. If you've got target saturation, you've got rhinos, you've got impulsors or other vehicles that might be moving forward such as dreadnoughts, your Predator Annihilator should be okay. It's going to be further back, it's not going to be the primary target, but its las cannons are going to be able to reach out and put AP3 damage, it's d6 damage per hit, on enemy vehicles and large targets, and that's going to be very painful. The sponson choice for this vehicle are quite interesting. You can either load out on heavy bolters so that you have quite an effective array to be able to put damage on heavy infantry, and also sort of plug away at infantry squads such as Astra Militarum, and 6 shots is nothing to be sneezed at when firing at orcs, as I mentioned earlier. Or you can go all in on las cannons and have 4 las cannon shots a turn with one vehicle, which again is very potent, but it is a little bit more expensive, of course. Again, my advice is to probably go for the utility, add the heavy bolters on. They're still going to do a little bit of damage to vehicles. You've still got the twin-link las cannon plugging away and contributing to your anti-tank firepower. And with the utility, it means that the vehicle is always going to have a use in a take-all-comers environment. Crucially, keeps the cost down, and it means that if you want more las cannons focused in one area of the army, you can take something like Devastators, which are probably going to be a lot more survivable than a Predator Annihilator. Now, moving on to the options, not including the sponsons, which we've already covered, we have the Hunter-Killer Missile, one of which can be taken on each tank. So the Predator Annihilator and the Predator Destructor are both quite good places to have a Hunter-Killer Missile. They're both designed to hunt and destroy vehicles, or large targets, or whatever their target is. And the Hunter-Killer Missile is a very effective 5-point upgrade. It's very cheap, and it's an anti-tank missile. It's very useful. If you do end up having 5 points left over, it will make your vehicle a lot more effective for one turn, so it's always worth doing. Of course, if you're 5 points over, it's an easy thing to cut, so don't feel bad if you have to cut it, but it's a nice little addition to take, and I do recommend it if you have the points available. Although some people strategically take as many of them as possible, they might take, say, 3 rhinos, each with a hunter killer missile, and then you might take 2 predators, each with a hunter killer missile, and that makes a very good strategy, and it gives you a lot of power on the table. Also, it can add up points wise, so bear this in mind if you're trying to get as much out of your army as possible. Maybe you're going to a tournament and you're really trying to wring every last little bit of effectiveness in the army, or you're like me where you often end up a couple of points over and you have to drop something. So if that happens, don't feel too bad. The other option, which I wouldn't recommend over a hunter killer missile, is the Stormbolter. When they were only 2 points, it was a great addition. For 2 points, yes, add it to every vehicle you can. It's doubling the firepower of rhinos, and it's adding a decent amount of firepower to a predator. However, at 5 points, you're better off with a hunter killer missile in an all-comers list, and unless you're up against an orc horde, you're just not going to need the Stormbolter. It can do a little bit extra damage, but for 5 points plus the hunter killer, that's 10 points. You're starting to really increase the cost of your vehicle, and I wouldn't recommend it. Again, it's not terrible if you've got it. If you've got 5 points left over and you want a Stormbolter because you want a little bit more effectiveness against infantry, perhaps you've gone a little bit all in on anti-tank, you've got loads of eradicators and attack bikes, and you want to just boost it up, this can help. But don't be afraid to cut it as the first thing to go if need be. Right, now if we move on to stratagem support, there's not much. There's literally only one that directly affects predators, and that is smokescreen, but it is quite a good one. If you're worried about your predator being targeted by the opponent in their shooting phase, and say it's on an objective, you want to keep them alive, or you just want to have it as your principal anti-tank firepower because everything else has been taken out, pop this stratagem. It means that they'll be -1 to hit with every attack that targets them until the end of the phase. That's a very effective way of keeping a vehicle alive a little bit longer. The beauty is it is used when they're actually targeted by the opponent as opposed to at the beginning of the phase. So it's a very effective way, and it doesn't waste a command point. So it's a useful stratagem to use, and I do recommend it. The very last thing to discuss is what units will supplement a Predator Annihilator or a Predator Destructor quite nicely on the table. Since the Predator Annihilator and the Predator Destructor do not have the core keyword, there's only a limited amount of assistance they can have from other units in the game. Psychic Fortress is definitely one. It can give them a 5-up invulnerable save because all it needs is a chapter unit to be within 6 of the Psycho, but therein's the problem. There's probably other units that your Psycho is going to be helping, and these vehicles are going to be slightly further behind, so might not even necessarily be close enough to your librarian to receive that kind of benefit. However, they can receive it, and it can be useful, especially if you pop smokescreen on them. As well as this, it could be quite a tough unit to remove. So the real unit that we're going to talk about, which can support a predator of any type, is a Tech Marine, as we all know. It was always going to come down to the Tech Marine. They have the ability to heal vehicles for D3 wounds, or for the full 3 wounds if they are a Master of the Forge, and they have Awaken the Machine Spirits in the command phase. They can awaken 1 friendly chapter vehicle model within 3 of them, and in that command phase, until your next command phase, this vehicle, whenever it makes a ranged attack, can add +1 to their shooting hit rolls, which is pretty good. In fact, it's actually very good when you consider that a Predator hits on 3+ as standard. Of course, you might be saving that for a much more effective death-dealing machine. As an example, a Gladiator Reaper would really enjoy that benefit, or a Land Raider of some stripe, but if you have a Tech Marine within range of a Predator, this will make the Predator very effective, and it's highly recommended. What's more, if the Predator is on an objective, holding that objective, and you're trying to keep it alive for longer, not only will they benefit from being more offensive with their shooting power, you're also going to heal it each turn, which is amazing. There are some extenuating circumstances that do benefit Predators, such as Sergeant Cronus piloting one, but again, that is a very different sort of tactica video, something probably for him in particular, because he can go in a lot of different vehicles, so that isn't really too relevant to most people. And also things like being an Ultramarine where you can fall back using their chapter tactic and then still be able to shoot with a -1 to hit, that's very effective. Also being able to shoot into close combat with a -1 to hit, being a vehicle, is also very effective, especially if you have heavy bolters and you get tagged by infantry. But again, it's not where you want to be, but it's something to bear in mind. If you've got the capacity to do those things, do it, because it makes your Predator very effective. Nothing worse than charging a unit, thinking that you've got them where you want them, and then they just blow away your 1 or 2, 3, whatever, a couple of models who've charged into them. It becomes a big risk. Why charge those 3 orcs into that predator when all they're going to do is get shot and the objective stays the same? Special mention for which armies really enjoy predators, things like Dark Angels, which have Grim Resolve as a chapter tactic. They get to have the benefit of a tech marine just by staying stationary, but again that means that they can't have the benefit of rolling around the table, blasting things off the table where needed and taking objectives, but again it makes them very effective, even if they are a little bit static, which is not a terrible thing. It just means you're going to have to make a tactical choice as and when you need to use certain abilities. 2 other chapters that really enjoy predators are Imperial Fists and Crimson Fists, both of which get benefits to their bolt weapons. An unmodified hit roll of a 6 scores 1 additional hit, which is, as you can probably imagine, very effective when you have sponsors and heavy bolters. And both of them also have a slightly different ability coupled with that. In the case of Imperial Fists, they ignore the benefits of light cover when firing at enemies, and in the case of Crimson Fists, if the target has 5 or more models than the attacker's unit, then they get to add +1 to their hit rolls. Obviously vehicles count as 5 models, but it means that if you're firing at larger units, you're going to be more likely to hit them. I've mentioned how Ultramarines do benefit their vehicles quite greatly. It means that they're not unlikely to be tagged. They don't have to just settle for shooting the opponent or not shooting at all when they back out. They can still back out and shoot the same target or any other target, which is very flexible. And Iron Hands, probably the last chapter that really benefits with predators, they get to have the wonders of having a 6 up to ignore wounds, which is very useful, and they can double the amount of wounds that they have remaining for the purposes of determining the characteristic when you have degrading profiles, which again is also quite effective for predators. Most of the other chapters give no real benefit from their chapter tactics to predators. However, there are some, such as salamanders, who they kind of have a net even. Forged in battle, quite good. If you get torrented by a lot of damage to weapons, which are often -1 AP, such as heavy bolters, or the predator autocannon, which is -1 AP, that will count as arm penetration characteristic of 0 against your predator, which is pretty good. But again, it's not the reason to take a predator. So it's a good effect, but it's not going to make or break the unit. Same as a lot of the other stuff from other chapters. It's okay. They got a lot of close combat capacity. They've got all sorts of things there, but the Predator can help them out because it gives them some fire support. So not something to ignore, but they won't get any direct benefit from those other chapters. Anyway, that was a fairly big one because I'm covering 2 units in one there, and there's a lot to say about them. I'm trying to cover as much as possible when I'm doing these talks. I'm trying to give you an example of what kind of chapters can really benefit them in what way. I'm trying to give a bit more in-depth overview. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to be back soon with another bit of content. I'm really enjoying making these videos again. It's great to be back. So thank you all for your support, and I'll catch you all soon. Peace out.